Today, we're going to talk about navigating office politics. And this is something near and dear to my heart because I am both interested in politics because I'm human, but I also like the ebb and flow, the give and take, the way we navigate our careers. And I can't think of a better co host than my friend Steve McIntosh. And before I introduce him, I just want to say today's webinar hosted by CareerPoint is being recorded. You will all get a copy of this webinar, and it is absolutely my pleasure as the host of Punk Rock HR and the author of Betting on You to bring really smart people into your ecosystem. And I couldn't do a better job than with my friend Steve McIntosh. So Steve, how you doing today?
Great, thanks, Laurie. What an introduction.
Yeah, well, I'm super
I'm
pleased you're
blushing.
here. Well, why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you're all about?
Sure. So my name is Steve McIntosh. I'm the CEO and founder of CareerPoint.com. As you know, I began my career as a chartered accountant. I'd fallen in with a bad crowd in high school. I needed the money. But the good news is I saw the error of my ways and turned to become a zealous convert to the value of human resources. And nowadays I'm passionate about helping people advance in their careers.
Amazing, amazing. So tell us a little bit about your book because you're an author as well.
So my book is essentially about how to create success in companies and how to become successful in your own career. And I know we're going to talk a lot about this, but it's all about how employees create value and why value drives both career success and company success.
Oh, I love it. You know, you had mentioned that you were a chartered accountant and you've gone over to what I think is the dark side of human resources, but you think is the light, right? And I just wonder, what has your own career journey been like? Because here we are, you're talking today about office politics, you've written a book on navigating the world of work. What was that pivot like for you?
You know, it's funny because it was never intentional. It just kind of happened, right? And I think that's how you find your place in the world. I've always been fascinated by human behavior, and I really found myself as an accountant just simply because the level of career guidance that I received in high school was you're good at math, you should be an accountant. And that, worked quite well for the first 5 years of my career I spent with KPMG. But ultimately, I found my place in recruitment initially. So I ran a recruitment firm for 17 years, and I loved it. I love working with people. I love trying to work on these complex problems. I loved trying helping companies build great teams and helping people build successful careers. I found my place in the world, and after 17 years, I decided to devote myself to something new. And I kind of see the first half of my career as helping people advance in their careers by finding them new jobs. And now we're at Career Point, we're all about helping people advance in their careers with the employers they have.
Oh, I love it. That makes so much sense. And, you know, I love that analytical journey from chartered accountant to someone who's passionate about recruitment, which is also data driven, all the way through now to being coaches and advisors and really helping people navigate the complex world of work. And that's actually why we're here today. We're here to talk about the world of work, how it's changing, how it's different, even post COVID, and really how office politics come to play, especially as we return back to the office, whatever that looks like. So today we're going to define office politics. We're going to talk about the influence of office politics, the role of HR in office politics, which, Steve, I can't wait to hear all the gossip about that. The common office politics mistakes, and then solutions and top tips, which is what we're all really here for. So why don't we get started today and just like dive into the good stuff and really define what office politics are. I mean, I think office politics are what happens when, people aren't functioning at their best, but I know that's not necessarily a commonly held assumption. So you tell me, what are office politics?
Interesting. So the way I would see office politics is that it's about the relationships you have at work and whether they help or hinder the achievement of your goals.
Hmm,
Right? So there's lots of different ways you could define it,
that's
but
right.
that's how I like to define it. Because if you think about politics, I mean, you're interested in politics. We're all interested in politics.
Sure.
What is politics? A cynic would say that it's a popularity contest, but actually, that's just one side to politics. The other side is actually getting stuff done, right? So you need other people in order to get stuff done, and that to me is what office politics is all about. Whether you're trying to complete a task, whether you're trying to complete a project, or whether you're trying to advance in your career, these are all goals that we could have, and we're going to need other people to come along with us to achieve the big things that we want to achieve.
Well, that certainly makes sense. I do take the negative when we talk about office politics, right? I do think of them as the kind of conniving way that people get ahead, but there are
Mm-hmm.
positive ways that you can get ahead, right? So, what's the positive definition of office politics? Like, how does that play out in a positive way?
Absolutely. And so I think it's very important. If you think about politicians, they're not all just about themselves, right? So when I
No.
talk about uh, needing relationships to achieve your goals, those goals could be community goals, right? It could be as a leader of a nonprofit. You still have goals, and those goals don't necessarily need to be self-serving goals. They could be goals on any level, but you're still going to need relationships. And so I think of politics as the office politics as the process of building influence to help you achieve your goals.
Mm. I think that's such an interesting take on that, and especially around the words of building influence, because we think about building influence externally, right? We're always talking about
Mm-hmm.
our personal brands. You and I are good friends with Jennifer McClure, who's a leading thought leader around the world of personal branding. But how do we build influence internally? Is that something that is commonly known? Because I'm not sure I ever did a good job at that.
Well, I think it's really important, right? And the way I would think about it is in three different dimensions. That to have influence, you need to be liked, you need to be respected,
Yeah.
and you need to be trusted. And you can be liked without being respected, right? If people just enjoy your company, but they don't listen to what you say,
Yeah.
then you're liked but not respected. You can even be respected but not trusted. So there might be a politician or someone in your company who you think is very bright and hardworking, but you don't trust them because you don't have the same agenda as they do. And so I think thinking about office politics on those three dimensions, you build influence by becoming liked, respected, and trusted. If you check all three boxes, then you're probably in a good position to influence other people's behavior and decisions.
Really interesting. I think about all the people who have been of benefit to me in my career, all the people who have helped me advance forward, and I've liked them, I've trusted them, I've respected them. So that formula makes sense to me. And I think at my best moments when I've been of service to others, I have ticked those boxes myself. And I just wonder, everybody in the chat, who do you know at work who's been liked, trusted, and respected? Like, who has been that person for you? Let us know in the chat. Is it a boss? Is it someone in procurement? It can never be someone in procurement, Steve. Come on. No, that's not
Could be someone in
possible.
HR.
It could be someone in HR. Yeah. Could it be someone in your supply chain, customer service? Who do you work with who ticks all three boxes? We absolutely want to know. Okay. So,
That's a
office
great way
politics.
to, such a good way to look at it, Laurie, because if you want to have that influence, then think of people you know who have those things and what they do to achieve it, right?
Oh, that's a great point. And I wonder, Steve, before we move on to, the next point I want to make around office politics, who's been that person for you? Who's been liked, trusted, respected in your career?
So many people, but the I've been my own boss for almost 20 years. And so I've had to find mentors at other levels in the company. And they may not even know that they've been my mentors or that I've learned from them. But it's something that I've always tried to apply in my life is that you can learn something from anyone you meet in any context. It doesn't matter what your relative stations are in life or how other people perceive those stations. Everyone has something they can teach you if you're curious. And that's kind of how I approach every relationship, no matter what our relative positions are.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Well, we've got some really great feedback in the chat around people who are, inspired by their immediate supervisors, their managers. So I'm glad to know that some of y'all out there are working with people that you like, Respect and trust. That absolutely makes me feel good. Well, Steve, let's talk about career advancement next
Mhm.
because, when I think about office politics, again, my brain goes to the negative, right? That's the bias I have. And I think
Mhm.
of all the people who've stepped in my way in my career in terms of advancement in politics. But let's talk about how office politics can benefit the advancement of your career. Tell me more.
Mhm. So again, coming back to this idea of being liked and respected and trusted, I think that it's very important to put yourself in that position in all of the relationships that you have in work. Because if you consider the network of relationships that you have in your workplace, they are abundant, right? You talked about HR, procurement, accounting, there are lots of relationships, and any one of these relationships can either add to your chances to advance and be promoted, or they can take away. And I think that's a good way to think about your political capital. That's a phrase that's often used in real politics, but not often used in office politics. What's your political capital? And just about everything you do in your office either builds political capital, it spends it, or it squanders it, right? And
Interesting.
that works whether it's the relationship you have with your boss, which we'll come back to because it's very important for your advancement. But it works with your co-workers, it works with people in other departments, it even works with customers and suppliers, because you just never know which of those relationships have influence that could be brought to bear on your career prospects.
Hmm. So tell us again, it's build, it builds capital, squanders capital. What's the three boxes there
And
again?
spends it.
And
And
spends it.
this works both ways, right? And I think this is kind of an important dimension to office politics, that as a boss, you're not immune from office politics. You still need relationships to get things done.
Yeah.
And so bosses need to consider how they build capital and how they spend it or squander it, because just about every action they take is going to do one of those three things.
So I know we're giving tips later on, but I'm really curious around people who are early in their career. How do they build that capital, right? That political capital? Because I think when you're older, you get to know people. You are at a different stage in life. But if you're early career, how do you build it? You're not really helpful to anybody. You're not of use. You don't really know what you're doing at your job. Any tips or advice for early careerists out there who want to build
Mhm.
political capital in the office?
So I would say the very most important thing is to be known, right? That's kind of a precursor to being liked or respected or trusted. You need to be known. And when I talk about being known, I don't just mean that someone recognizes your name because they've seen it in a Slack group or copied on an email.
Right.
That's very important, as the relationships are built the same way they were built 10,000 years ago. They're face to face. And really, to begin to build influence, you need to start by building relationships, and that has to start somewhere. And there are all kinds of ways that you can start to build those relationships just by being visible to people as a real person, and not as this electronic avatar that is
Yeah,
that
but
is barely seen as human, right?
Steve, that's got to be challenging in this age of COVID, right? In the post-COVID environment, not everybody is back in the office, and I think the bias for a lot of people is to see one another as avatars right now because we're still all on Zoom. So talk to me
Mhm.
about that challenge.
Well, I think it's important to recognize what are the formal rules and what rules have you assumed, right? So let's imagine that you've just joined a new company,
Yeah,
and in this company, everything is done by Slack. And so you just kind of fit right in and you start slacking away, you're messaging away, and well, this is just how things are done, right?
sure. Yeah, yeah.
But is it? Is there something stopping you from having a Zoom call?
Huh? Yeah.
Or is this an assumption that you've made that people prefer Slack? Because there are lots of people, like an old timer like me, who isn't crazy about Slack, and I would rather just have a conversation. And so we're both in this dynamic of just Slack messaging one another, even though we would both prefer to just have a quick Zoom call. So be careful about the assumptions that you make in your new environment, and try to lead that process, right? So there's an asymmetry here, because if someone new joined CareerPoint and they made this assumption that in CareerPoint everybody uses Slack and that's just how people communicate, that's not a problem for me, right? I'm
Yeah,
CEO. So it's less of a problem for me than it is for them.
that's right.
So the onus is on the new employee to do something to change this dynamic, to build the relationship with me. And we actually have a relatively new member of our team named Bakunzi who did a fantastic job of this. He always did this. He said, "Let's have a quick Zoom call." Why? And I'm obviously like, sure, why not?
Yeah,
Right?
of course, right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So don't just assume that things are done a certain way. Uh, Feel free to break the mold and just check that and you can check that assumption just by asking, right? Would you prefer, are you okay if I call you on Zoom? It's
Well,
very
that's
unlikely that someone would say no.
And that's such a nice way to couch the risk because it's not like you're demanding a phone call. You're demanding a Zoom call. You're actually asking someone what their preference is and if there's an alternative way. So I like that way because so many people are just afraid to even ask the question. And there's nothing wrong about asking a question if it's couched in someone else's preferences. So that's a really beautiful
Absolutely. You know, I once
intent.
I once had a conversation with a lady who had been struggling to advance, and it came down to the fact that she hadn't had very much face time with the CEO of the company, and she was concerned that the CEO didn't really know that they existed, and so on. And I asked if she had ever invited the CEO for a coffee, and the reaction was, "Oh my goodness, but I can't do that." To which I said, "Why not?"
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can invite anyone you like for a coffee. They might say no, but it's actually kind of unlikely. If you work in if you're in a department or a division with a couple hundred people, what's the worst that can happen is that they say, "Actually, I'm busy. Can we do this next month?" But guess what? Next month you're going to be having coffee with the CEO.
That's
So
right.
it's just something that most people don't think that it's possible to do, but actually what's stopping you?
Well, what stops us is the story we tell ourselves, right? The imposter syndrome that we get from society or that we give to ourselves. And I just wonder when you're coaching people to navigate office politics, how often does that story get in the way?
All the time.
Yeah.
And it's really, I think what helps is to consider the worst case scenario, right? Now, this might sound crazy, but it works in all kinds of situations, right? So what is the worst case scenario? Well, maybe they're too busy and they don't have time. Okay, so what? That's the worst case scenario, that you receive an email back that says that the CEO doesn't have time to meet? That such a bad scenario? It's, the CEO isn't going to kick down the office door and fire you on the spot. And once you actually consider what is the worst thing that can happen here, it actually makes it feel slightly less daunting.
Oh, for sure. I'm a big advocate of that, like preventative thinking, that pre-mortem thinking. So I love that idea of really thinking through what's the worst thing that can happen. And for example, if your CEO would fire you for asking, maybe you shouldn't work there, but
Great
what
point,
CEO would ever do that? That's insane.
right?
Well, I love this idea that office politics can positively influence career success if you are, trusted, if you have the right capital, and if you spend it in the right way. But tell me just some quick mistakes that people make with their capital. Like, where does this
Mm.
go wrong?
I'm going to tell a story that I tell often, which is about a young member of my team when I managed the recruitment firm, who, to cut a long story short, felt passed over for promotion. And they resigned essentially in protest about having been passed over. And when he brought this to my attention, I was just baffled because I had no idea that he felt this way. I had no idea that he had this ambition level. He'd never demonstrated it in my mind. He left the office at 5 o'clock. He never came to me with an idea or a suggestion. He never volunteered to lead a project. The list went on of things that I would have expected someone to do that he hadn't done. And so he'd never told me that it was his desire to advance. So when he told me that he was so unhappy about not having advanced, that he was leaving the company, I was just kind of blown away. But I see this as a failure of office politics in two ways,
Hmm.
because really, what this young colleague should have done is to at least tell me that he wanted to advance in his career. And we have this paradigm in Career Point that we call the three-step plan for guaranteed career success. You ready?
Yeah, I
This is
am.
good.
Tell
You're going
me,
to want to
because I
write this
need
down at
it.
home.
Yeah, tell me. My career is
uh,
terrible. So let's go.
well,
What is it?
step one is to tell your boss that you want to advance,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And that you'd be amazed. Like, really, do you even need steps 2 and 3? If you've already had that conversation, that's a great start. And actually, that's the easiest part, but it's also where it normally breaks down. Step 2 is to ask them what you need to do in order to advance, right?
And yeah, like
And
tell me
step
step 3.
3 is to do it,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple and yet so complex, because I think many of us are sitting around waiting to be asked.
that's exactly what happened in my situation, right? So that was kind of an epiphany for me, was thinking, geez, are you crazy? You thought you were going to be promoted? Why would we promote you? You were not on the list. Your name never came up. But then to reverse engineer it and think, how did this happen?
Yeah.
And eventually coming to the realization that it wasn't his fault, it was my fault. I should have told him the things that he had to do to advance. I should have asked him what his ambition was and helped him achieve it, right? So
Well,
this was 10 years ago. So I'm happy to say that things got better for most people who worked in my company. But this is what we help companies do now. This is kind of the building blocks of success. And our philosophy at CareerPoint, as you know, is that company success is built on the success of the people in the company, and therefore helping people become more successful is the best way to create a successful company.
yes, that's absolutely accurate. Well, I love that story, and I love your own individual growth, Steve. And I love that you are using office politics now to help other people advance in their careers a little bit more proactively. So that's pretty great. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how office politics impacted your career, because I think in my career specifically, and I'd
Mhm.
love to hear stories of people in the chat, in my own career, I was never very good, as you can tell, and adept at dealing with office politics. And instead of like taking that on and trying to get better, I left human resources. And I write
Mhm.
about this in my book extensively. Like I couldn't deal with it. And, it was a failure really of me to level up and to get these skills. And also, I just was not a good fit in what I was doing, but I ended up exiting. And I wonder how many of us out there walk away from what could be lucrative, profitable, interesting, compelling, important work just because we're conflict avoidant, which is exactly what I
Mhm.
was. So tell me a little bit about your own career and how office politics impacted your own development.
Before I get to that, I have to say I'm reading your book at the moment, and I've I almost spit my drink out, whatever the drink is, several times in every chapter.
All
It's
right.
so entertaining.
Thank you.
It's brilliant. So I recommend it to anyone who's watching. But I think it's interesting to reflect on my own career and to think about the things that I did right and to think about the things that I did wrong. When I was trying to advance in my career, because I was very ambitious. And looking back, this was kind of, when I had this experience with my own employee, and I reflected on the fact that I hadn't told him what he needed to do to advance and that he hadn't expressed his ambition. I suddenly saw myself in that paradigm
Oh, interesting.
10 years or more prior. Back in my days with KPMG, I hadn't told anyone specifically what my career goals were. No one asked. It was just assumed. And I thought I knew what I had to do to advance, but I never asked. And that was kind of where I joined the dots to think this isn't just Steve McIntosh or my colleague. This is pretty much every company, every business unit, every team has a very familiar dynamic. And the things that went well in my own early career were almost complete, I would say, dumb luck,
Hmm.
right? So the first thing was, and one part of your book that gave me pause was, I think, was it a professor who told you that you should not take a semester off, something like
Yeah,
that. So
to double down on my academic career and also my student loans to finish, to complete my degree.
right,
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And so no one gave me that advice. My career might have turned out very differently if they had, but I took 2 years out from my undergrad and I went back to finish. Um, and the strange thing was that when I joined the workforce, I was older than most of my peers.
Yeah.
And that gave me a really interesting advantage looking back because my social circle was my superiors. And, when you're 23, a couple of years makes a big difference, right?
For
So I
sure, for
was,
sure.
my social circle, I kind of connected the two circles, and most of my time was spent with people who were my superiors. And I kind of absorbed things by osmosis, and they gave me advice. And, I looked to some of those people as mentors, and it gave me a lot of great experience. One of those was just the opportunity to travel internationally. We did an audit based in Washington, D.C., which really inspired me to look overseas for the rest of my career.
Wow.
So that was complete fluke. So the next stage for my career was to move to the Cayman Islands, as you know, which I did back in 2001, still with KPMG. But when I joined the Cayman Islands office, the firm had just begun introducing an electronic audit platform.
Yeah.
The UK had adopted it the prior year. So I was the only person, because I was the only new start from the UK. Most of my colleagues were from the States and Canada, and I'd been with KPMG. I was the only person who had seen this platform before. So I had this advantage of being a super user compared, in the land of the
Ah,
blind, the one-eyed man is king. That was me in 2001 in KPMG. So I had this advantage, and again, dumb luck, but it gave me exposure to people in the organization that I wouldn't have had exposure to otherwise. And I looked for all kinds of projects to get involved in. If this had been a deliberate strategy, it would have been a good one, and I would recommend this to people. This is something we talk about a lot: is the importance of uh, projects as a first step into leadership, but also as a way to gain exposure to a broader range of people within the organization. Leading projects is a fantastic way to do that. And again, it wasn't a deliberate strategy on my part. I was really just trying to get away from the relatively mundane work at that stage in my career, right? I was photocopying and printing things, and any opportunity to get away from that, I put my hand up.
well, and I like how you became kind of a de facto expert and you could be of service to others in your career at that point. And that builds on that wonderful point you made around being respected, right? And people could come to you and ask really important questions. And I'm sure in your youthful way, you answered them without at all being arrogant or cocky, right?
I hope so. I did my best. I
Yeah,
guess it
I'm
worked
sure.
out.
I'm sure you did. Well, I'm so pleased that we're talking about career advancement. And I just wonder if people out there have their own stories about navigating the complex world. You know, Steve, you made such an interesting point around being a little bit older than your working group and
Mhm,
socializing with people who are maybe a level above you, right? Or not
mhm,
necessarily being congruent with your cohorts. And I think there are so many people now currently who leave the workforce and come back due to parenting or caregiving. And they feel insecure about it, right? They don't know where they fit into the world of work because they've stepped away for 3, 5, 7, 15 years and they come back and things are different. How do those individuals navigate the world of office politics?
It's a great question, and my experience from this comes more from my experience of being a CEO than being a junior accountant trying to work my way up, right?
Sure.
Because I've seen what works from the other side.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that as the CEO, some people are quite deferential and respectful, and other people just treat me like a human being, right? They speak to me as if I'm just a human being, not as someone who's older or wiser or, a bit of an idiot. They just treat me like a human being. And
Like a
that would be
regular
my
guy.
advice, right?
Yeah.
That would be my advice to anyone, is just when you relate to people, treat them like an equal human being.
Hmm.
Now, if they're senior to you in the organization, what does that mean? It means that they might have to approve what you're working on. It means that you might have to consult them. You can do all those things and still relate to them as a human being, right? As a CEO, I had a weekend. If I had a meeting with someone who was relatively junior in the company, they might come into my office and sit trembling, or they might come in and ask me how my weekend was,
Mhm. That's right.
right?
That's right.
And
Absolutely.
as the CEO, I'm not going to respond by saying, well, that's none of your business. I'm going to say, it was very good, thanks. How was yours?
Yeah, you mean
And
you're going
this
to
is
be a
how,
normal person. Yes.
exactly, this is how, and this is how, those are the building blocks of good relationships. It's not to, so lots of people, I think, would make the mistake of being overly deferential and to say, oh, it's not my place to ask the CEO how their weekend was. Why not? Right. And so, and it's kind of, it works to some extent in reverse too, right? Because if someone comes to me and they're very deferential, I'm going to treat them maybe a bit as if they should be, right? If someone speaks to me as if they're on my level, I'm more likely to treat them as if they are.
That's exactly right. But we have to believe it in ourselves in order for others to see it. And I think that's where
Absolutely.
the coaching at Career Point and your amazing book is incredibly helpful. We have a question in the Q&A, and I want to invite everybody, if you have formal questions, the Q&A is where it's at. Like, you can chat and say hi to us, but the Q&A is where we're going to get to your questions at the end of the webinar. But one came in, Steve, that I want to get to right away because someone asked about office politics when you're older and report to someone who's younger, right? If you're older and you have
Mm-hmm.
ambitions and you report to someone who's younger and has
Mm.
ambitions, how do you navigate that? Like, any thoughts on that?
That's really interesting. And I think you almost have to acknowledge the slightly awkward dynamic
Is it
in
awkward?
order, potentially.
Yeah, I
I
think
do
so too.
believe, this, I was, when I first started my recruitment business, I was 30 years old. And
Okay.
luckily, I was kind of a cocky 30-year-old. So I know that's going to shock you. But so luckily, I had a lot of confidence, right?
Sure.
But but occasionally I did work with people who were older than I was. And it was a somewhat awkward, there was a change in tone, right? And I'm not sure whether it was me or whether it was them or what was going on, but there is but I think you almost need to kind of acknowledge that to move past it. I don't mean discuss it. I just mean to acknowledge it to yourself that
Yeah.
this person is younger than me, but they're my boss, and I should treat them the same way I treat other human beings. And I should, I need to deliberately avoid talking down to them. I need to deliberately avoid bringing up that I have twice as much experience as they do,
Yeah,
right?
that's
These are the
really good
traps that you
advice.
could fall into that would cause you a lot of problems with your career advancement because your relationship with your boss is the most important relationship for your career advancement. And if you don't manage that relationship effectively, it's going to hold you back.
Well, you're certainly not going to be liked by your boss, which is your one of your core components, right, of your career
Mm-hmm.
advancement if you're constantly reminding your boss that you're smarter than your boss at any age. So I
Exactly.
love that piece of advice. That's great wisdom. Well, I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about the next question, which for me I think is really important. So we've talked a little bit about your own career, and I wonder how HR can help employees cope with office politics because
Mm-hmm.
for me, HR is such a weird but maybe adept position to do this.
Mm-hmm.
HR hears it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're supposed to remain confidential. So, how does HR help with all of this?
It's a difficult position to be in, right? Because
Yeah.
often HR is portrayed as being either on the side of employees or on the side of the company. I don't think that's not really a constructive way to think about the function. And I'm sure the people who are in HR don't think of the function that way, but it can create kind of an awkward dynamic. I think the most important role for HR is just to be a sounding board,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
This is one aspect of our coaching that was a big surprise to me when I started many years ago was that people don't often have the chance just to talk about how they feel. And this is what therapy is, right?
Yeah.
It's just you talking about your problems, and but the process of talking kind of helps you unload. And that's so this goes back to my earlier point about not doing everything by Slack and email. So it would be tempting to say, I have this problem with office politics at work. I'm going to send this long email to my HR department, and they're going to send me a long email back with lots of advice. Probably not. I find emails are not a good way to get things off my chest. Maybe that's why therapy is not done via email or via Slack, right? So I think to flip that around, the HR department needs to just be available. You can't help people who don't want to be helped. But when people do reach out and want help, just be there to be a sounding board. And that doesn't mean that you need to steer them in one direction or another. Because as you know, that's not what coaching is about either. It's just about listening and asking the right questions.
I often feel as if HR gets pulled into something beyond office politics, which is office gossip, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
drama, unnecessary drama. So
Mm-hmm.
I know we're going to talk about HR's own gossip, HR's own politics, HR's own drama. So we'll put that aside. But if you're in human resources,
Mm-hmm.
how can you be supportive without enabling, without really, getting enmeshed in some of the stuff that's happening within your organization? Because
Mm-hmm.
we talk about relating to people on a human to human level.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's some petty stuff going on at work, right?
Absolutely. And I think in that situation, it's about clarifying the goals would be a great starting point, right? So, what are we trying to accomplish here? uh, because I think the natural human temptation would be to step into the drama and
Yes.
to try to arbitrate the situation. That's probably not going to help. It could end up making it worse because in the process, well, tell me again what this colleague did that was so annoying and why did this annoy, right? This is not going to result in a positive outcome. But if you take it from the opposite direction and say, well, what are we trying to, what's important here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And try to bring it up a level, if you like, and
Yeah.
get everyone back on the same page. That's how to. That's there's no. I don't think you'll ever resolve the situation by stepping into it. But the gossip is very very destructive. It's incredibly destructive to culture and just to value for employees and organizations.
Steve, that's so insightful. And I was just thinking about my own career in human resources. And oftentimes, that inclination to step into the gossip and into the drama is because I myself or my colleagues were bored or just unhappy with the work that we were doing
Right.
in human resources, right? So
Yeah.
we're like, oh, some stuff's going down. Let's
Mhm.
find out what this is all about, right? And so I think there's the point that you made about clarifying goals is so important because had we kept our eye on the prize and thought, okay, this is not what we're here to do, we wouldn't have enmeshed ourselves in that drama. But sometimes,
It's
it's
hard to resist.
it is, I don't
It's
know how
hard to
else to
resist,
say
right?
that.
it's
So I mean
it's
we're
why
human,
people
right?
watch
To your
soap
earlier
operas
point.
and sitcoms.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just it's the human, and there's a curiosity that kicks in whenever you hear gossip and drama to say, oh, and then what did you say? That's just human nature. But
But
I
the diff
think go
Please,
on.
sorry. No, I think the differentiation that you make between office politics, which could be how you maneuver around the office to get to that stated goal, versus drama and chaos and gossip, which are destructive to a company's culture, they're two different things, and it's important to make sure that you course correct as soon as possible. I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
Well, there is one thing, which is that a lot of the time gossip is has a foundation in reality, right?
Oh,
So it might not
totally.
be something that one person has done to offend another person, but it might be kind of a shared frustration. And this is something that again I've experienced in my own company from the perspective of the CEO. And I can tell you that when I found out about the gossip and I the first thing I thought is, why did no one tell me about this or
Yeah.
ask me about it? Right? So it could be, let's say, this company's onboarding process is a disaster, it doesn't work. But if colleagues, if employees just sit around talking about that and kind of amping each other up about it and say, yes, it's terrible, and then they did this, and then they did this is not helping resolve the situation. But if you went to someone and said, can I make a suggestion? It would, if it had been me, I would have said, sure, I'm all ears, please. Tell me how it should have been, and
Right.
I will make it thus. But sitting around gossiping about it is
Yeah.
destructive and not helpful. So they're really missing an opportunity to actually add value through solving the problem rather than creating a whole bunch of drama and bad feeling around it.
Well, I like it. We're both focused on building political capital out of gossip. So I think that's the right way to put a cap on that. So I would love to talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes or issues with office politics because, we've talked about gossip and drama, but I know there's a whole bevy of things that you believe get in the way of a productive work environment. So what are some of the common mistakes or issues?
Two common issues, I think.
Okay.
The first one would be caring too much, right? So thinking that it's all about the office politics. It's not. So, as you know, our
Yes.
framework at CareerPoint is all about how employees create value and how value drives career success. And office politics is just one tiny sliver of all of the ways that you could create value. We have 8 value drivers. Office politics is what we call positioning. It's just one of those 8 things. But if you think it's everything, you are going to get a reputation as the Machiavelli of your company. And that is probably, you're not going to be trusted, is the problem. You're
That's
right.
right. Yeah.
The second big problem is to not care enough.
Hmm.
Right.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so to dismiss it and say, well, as long as I work hard and I do good work, I'm going to advance. And I would say that is 90% of the equation. It would be a real shame if you didn't make it the last 10% of the way by having good relationships and building the network that you're going to need. Because advancement decisions come down to one scenario, which I encourage people to think about literally because it's how advancement decisions are made. It is some people sitting around a table talking about who is going to be promoted, right? That's not an abstraction. That's how it really works,
That
right? You've
is
been
how it
there.
works.
That's how it works.
And
So,
the
right.
decision is often made based on exactly the three components you talked about. Who's liked, who's trusted, who's, someone who adds value to the organization, all of those boxes we talked about. But oftentimes it comes down to who's liked. I don't know, Steve, what do you think
Exactly.
about that? Yeah.
The people around that table have to, when your name comes up, they have to endorse you as a candidate. So just knowing who's around the table is a good start. Who's involved in this decision, right? Because those are the people whose influence you're going to need in order to advance. Now, I can tell you the most common mistake I would say in terms of career advancement is to not realize that your boss will be at that table,
Mm,
right? I can't
yes.
tell you, as CEO of a recruitment firm for almost 20 years, I employed hundreds of people in various different offices and so on. And I can't tell you the number of people who would rather be right than advance in their careers, right? They would
Yeah, true.
often get into arguments with me, which I found kind of bizarre. It's like, what? How is this going to serve your, stomping out of my office indignant because they disagree with my decision is not going to serve their career advancement goals. Going around the office telling everyone that I'm an idiot because I disagree with them, that's not going to help your career advancement. But and I think in that situation, those people kind of forgot that I was the key decision maker to their advancement, or maybe not just me, maybe their supervisor or their manager. Having a dissonant relationship with your boss
Yeah.
is completely toxic to your career advancement goals. So it doesn't mean being a suck up, right?
No.
That's not what it's about, right?
Right. Yeah.
It just
You,
means being constructive. If you have to disagree, do it in a constructive way, but accept that if you're going to be overruled, you didn't make the decision. So you can't be held responsible for the decision. What's not to like about that? You've said your piece, you disagreed. If it turns out you were right, everyone's going to say, hey, you know what? Laurie was right.
Well,
That's a
that's for
good
sure.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of this concept that I absolutely love, which is called professional detachment. A lot of times we go to work and we're so emotionally enmeshed in every decision that's made that work tends to break our heart and
Mhm.
everything becomes a fight, which is a scenario that you just described, right? But we
Yep.
don't bring that kind of weird codependent energy to our personal relationships because if we did, people would leave us all the time, right? We don't bring that kind of toxic energy to our friend group because they would say, that's too much. We don't want to hang out with you. And yet we bring all of this emotion, all of this passion to work. And what I like to tell people is to treat work like your very favorite client. Like, would you
Mm,
absolutely act this way with a client? No, you'd have a little distance. You'd have a little, it would be a little dispassionate
mm,
intentionally because to your point, Steve, the client is always right, right? If the CEO makes a decision that you disagree with and the CEO is wrong, to your very brilliant point, you then look amazing. You look psychic. So I love that. I absolutely love that story. So thank you for sharing that. I also like the point you made around caring about office politics too much because you look like Machiavelli, because nobody likes Machiavelli. When do you
Mhm.
ever bring up that example and people are like, oh, Machiavelli's a great example? You know, like
And it's
nobody
been
ever,
shown not to, studies have shown it doesn't work in
for
any
sure.
context,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, I wonder if we could talk about some of the top tips as we start to wrap up this conversation and get to questions. What are the top tips for dealing with all of this? Like, how do we make sense of it? So, what do
Mm.
you got for us?
So number one would be the one that I've already mentioned, which is not to over rely on electronic forms of communication, right? And to allow that to become a barrier to you creating and nurturing relationships with coworkers. It's a very easy trap to fall into, but especially when you're trying to, it's fine if you're in a company where you know everyone really well and you've been working together for years. That's why the culture appears that way when you join as a new member of staff. But
Yeah.
to begin to build a network, remember that networks and relationships are built face to face. They need to hear your voice, they need to see your face. This is just human nature. It was a kind of a paradigm that I learned during recruitment, which always interested me, is that, and I know we have lots of HR folks on the webinar, that this will probably resonate with. When you see a resume, right, it's almost like this person exists only on paper. It's like an avatar almost.
Yeah.
But as soon as you meet that person, it's like that's the moment that they became real. Now you have a picture of them in your head as a real person, not as a piece of paper, right? And it's kind of the same process behind email and Slack. So don't over rely on emails. The second thing is to be generous, right? It's to help people without any expectation in return. Because if you are that kind of person by nature, people will seek you out. They will want to work with you. They'll believe that you will support them when they need something and they need help. And you will kind of accrue political capital naturally without really having to try. And this isn't to say that it's transactional to say, well, I think I could get something from this person. So, I'm going to help them this time because they might help me in the future. That's not really how it works. You have to be generous enough to help lots of people, knowing that 90% of them will never return the favor. But
That's right.
guess what? The 10% that do, that's going to be the 10% that helps you advance. And I think the third thing I would point to is this idea of disagreeing without being disagreeable,
Hmm. I
which
love
is
that.
a skill that nearly everyone needs to learn. And it's not easy, believe me, because when you get into a disagreement, the blood starts rushing to your head and you say things that you regret. And uh, I'm right, darn it. Why won't you listen to me? Right. But it's not constructive. And there's a great framework called Disagree and Commit, which has become popular. This is something that's been used in Amazon. You'll find some good resources online about this. And it's really useful and it's really powerful. So it's the idea that you express your disagreement. And by the way, you need to express the case for your position, right? So you can't just say, I think this is a terrible idea.
Yeah, no.
That's just called being a naysayer. That's not going to be, I'm not going to say, if I say, why do you think this is a terrible idea? You need to have an answer for that, right? And the more eloquently you can put it, the more chance you have of influencing the group or the decision maker. But if the decision is not yours to make, then allow the decision to be made, whether it's by the group or by a manager or CEO, and then commit to that course of action, even though it wasn't your preferred course of action, right? Why? Because the alternative is for you to just chirp at the decision maker to say, see, I told you this was a terrible idea and this is never going to work. And I can tell you, when you're in the position of having to do that, as a CEO, you have to make difficult decisions that could be 50-50 decisions.
Sure.
And it could be that half of the company says you should do option A and the other half says option B. Like, well, I have to do one of the two. So, I'm going to disappoint 50% of the company, but it's not going to be helpful if you say, Steve's an idiot, doesn't know what he's doing. I told it's going to be a disaster, because it makes me start to think, well, the reason this isn't going to work is that you don't think it's going to work. That's the
Right.
problem here. And that is not going to help you advance in your career.
Well, Steve, I love all of those tips, including don't chirp. Like that's a really good one. Like nobody likes a chirper, office
No.
politics or not, nobody wants to hang out with the chirper. So just remember that if you remember anything else. And listen, I know we've got some really great questions that have come in around how to manage office politics. So if you're ready to do a lightning round of questions, I'm ready. Are you ready to go, Steve?
Absolutely. But you should, I mean, you have lots of experience too. Laura, you've written a book about this. So answer the questions yourself if you feel so inclined.
I will, absolutely. So somebody asks, I want to get promoted in the next 3 years, but my organization doesn't use KPIs or other performance metrics. How can I demonstrate my value outside of metrics? Steve, you answer and I'll chime in on this one.
Wow, that's a really good question, actually. So
Common.
the first
Yeah.
the first thing I would say is that they don't need to be formal, right? So it doesn't need to be formalized KPIs, but I think it is very important to understand, what does awesome look like?
Hmm.
And this is kind of a good starting point. So it's one way that we talk about Career Point. We help people become awesome at work. And it sounds kind of, well, obviously everyone wants to be awesome at work, but do you know what awesome looks like to your company? Do you know what it looks like to your boss? So just have that conversation and let them describe what awesome looks like to them. They don't need to do it. They don't need to lay it out in terms of OKRs or KPIs. They just need to tell you in plain English, here's what I think awesome would look like. And then do it. I think the second thing would be to sign up for Career Point coaching, and we'll help you do it.
Well, I don't hate that last tip. I think that's real smart. I love this idea of what does awesome look like. I also think that just because there are no stated OKRs or KPIs, by the way, if I never work with an organization that has acronyms like that again, I will be absolutely fine. Like that's too much for me. But I think we all know what organizations get measured on. Like there are certain
Mm-hmm.
standards of productivity, of revenue, of sales, of, customer success. And even if they're not explicit, they're definitely implied. But Steve, you made a really great point earlier around asking. You don't have to ask your boss around, what does awesome look like, right? You can ask your peers. You can ask
Mm-hmm.
people, all right, if I want to get promoted, what do I got to do around here, right? Like you
Yeah.
can ask these questions and you're not going to get fired for asking. So I don't know, what do you think about that? Like why don't people ask these questions more, Steve?
It's a great question. I think it's a big problem. And I think it's part of the complexity of work that's been created in the last 40 years. Jobs used to be a lot simpler, and they're becoming more and more complicated all the time.
Yeah.
And what this creates is that there's more that you need more guidance today than you ever have, because the job is just more complicated. And so I think this, asking other people in the network, whether it's the HR department or whether it's a peer who you have a lot of respect for, if you see someone who does something that's awesome, ask them to teach you how to do it that well. And I bet you anything, they'll be delighted to, because how often does someone say to you, Laurie, well, they say this to you all the time because you are awesome at so many things, but most of us don't ever get that, right? Someone says,
No,
you're awesome at this thing. Can you help me get better at it? Because I'm really trying. That doesn't really happen to most people. So
no.
that's a tool that you can use to not just get better and to become awesome, but also just to build the relationship, because there's almost no better way to build a relationship than to ask someone for advice.
I think that's so true. Well, we have another question that I'm going to paraphrase from the Q&A. So if you have questions, please drop them in the formal Q&A and I will definitely see them and we'll get to it. But someone writes that their organization has complexities around how HR is respected and they don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
they can navigate office politics because HR is not respected within the organization. So I'm inferring that they're part of HR, right? And they want to get ahead. So, what's your
Mm-hmm.
advice for that, Steve? Because it's not just HR that gets a bad rap. There are a lot of departments within a company where you join and you're like, oh my God, they hate us, So, customer
Yeah.
service, right? Maybe
Yeah.
the warehouse, right?
Yeah.
We all have stepped into a job where the job has some reputational issues. So, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, I was going to tell a story about someone that it might have been somewhat indiscreet, but there are times when this certainly can become a problem. So I have an acquaintance who works sometimes in startups, and that he has referred to HR in those terms as that, everything was fine until we got an HR manager, and then they started creating complexity. And I think what's interesting about that, I think, is that if if the department has that kind of reputation, whether it's HR, IT, any other department, the question is, what is it that the other business units want
Mm.
that they're not getting? And if if the answer is nothing, or like just leave us alone, that would be a good start, right? I
Yes,
mean,
correct.
right. So it's kind of like, what can we do to help? It's like I said about your boss, ask them how to advance and just let them tell you. It's the same with any department that you have low standing with. What problem do you have that we can solve?
Yeah.
Because it sounds to me like the department has a problem that they're solving a problem that the department doesn't even acknowledge exists.
That's exactly right. I love that answer. Oftentimes I think too, our ego gets caught up in all of this, right? We step into a
Mhm.
role and it turns out maybe the person who did that job before us didn't have a terrific reputation and
Yep,
some relationships have been burned and we think, oh, I'm
exactly.
going to prove the world differently. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to do your job, right? And that's where this professional detachment kind of comes from. At the end of the day, you're not getting graded really on how you do at work except in your paycheck. So if you're getting a
Mhm.
paycheck, you're solving problems, the organization keeps you employed, continue to do some of that. And the more you strive sometimes,
Mhm.
the more awkward you make things. I don't know. What do you think about that, Steve?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think humility is a superpower that you
Yeah.
need to advance. And this is a huge problem for not just for everyone, because it's very, very difficult to hear criticism. But if you look at it, so this is, I think, where ambitious employees can take a leaf out of the startup playbook, because for startups, the conventional wisdom is that you start doing something and then you check in with the customer and see how that's going, right? And you allow the customer to help you build your product.
Yeah.
But you can do the same thing in your own career, right? You just have to think of
That's
yourself as
true.
the startup and think of your boss as the customer. And you keep going back to say, is this working? And if not, how can I change it so that it works better? But you need to be, just like it's very difficult to go to a customer as a company and say, how was our service? And if they say it was terrible, that's a difficult thing to hear. But
Yeah.
as CEO of the company, I can't, not that anyone said that to CareerPoint, by the way, but it's theoretically possible. Uh, if my response is to say, well, who do you think you are? That's not going to that's not
Nobody
going to
wants
build
that.
a
No.
successful business relationship, right? I need to take their feedback on board, whether it's positive, negative, or ideally it is negative because it gives us something to act on. But it's very difficult to hear that when you go into an appraisal, for companies that still do that. Who does that? Still does annual appraisals. I know there are some companies that still, believe it or not, still do annual appraisals. When you go into an appraisal, what do you want to hear? That you've done a fantastic job, right? You awesome, brilliant,
Yes.
no
Yes.
complaints. And then you're going to come in the next day. You're going to that you no longer feel like $1 million. That it's the elation has worn off, and you don't know what to do. You
Yeah.
don't know,
No.
like you have no actionable information. So what you want is compliments, but what you need is actually here's what you could be doing differently. It's very difficult for bosses to articulate that often, and so everyone should take it upon themselves to create a safe space for their boss to give them the kind of feedback that they need to advance in their career, right? And that's a sort of a term that's normally used the other way around. It's for the boss to create the safe space. Well, sometimes it is, but it's also for you to create that safe space, because I can tell you as a boss, it's very, very difficult to give someone negative feedback. And people complain that, well, my boss never gives me feedback. Well, the reason is that 99% of people react very badly to any kind of feedback unless it is just compliments. So
Well, that's
take it
right.
upon yourself to create that safe space, and you'll get the information that you need to advance.
I love it. We're back to the theme of being emotionally regulated and professionally detached. It's amazing. Well, Steve, listen, we've got a bevy of questions that have come in, but we're at the top of the hour. So I want to let everybody know that there is another Career Point webinar that's coming up. And if you all visit the Career Point LinkedIn page, you're going to get all the information about it. It's going to be about Gen Z, very trendy. Our good friends Sean McQueen and Jennifer McClure are going to be on, so it's going to be a much better webinar than this. It's going to be just awesome. It's going to be
Awesome. I
great.
can't wait. That
I know,
sounds
me neither. And I feel as if we need to tell people, if we didn't answer your questions, go to the LinkedIn page and ask the questions there. Find us, connect with us, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. And again, everybody's going to get a copy of this presentation of the deck and the recording, so you'll have all the resources from today's conversation. And Steve, I just wanted to thank you again for being part of a wonderful webinar discussion around navigating office politics.
well, thank you, Laurie. We really appreciate it.
Well, and everybody, I hope you head on over to careerpoint.com. And for Steve, I'm Laurie Rudiman. Have a great day. Bye.